Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Erica, and I coordinate the Institutional Grammar Research Initiative, also known as the IGRI. Today, our research seminar series features scholars from around the world who use the IG to examine the origins, structure, and implications of institutional design. I am very excited to introduce our guest speakers today, Irene, Ute, Daniel, Ismael, and Alicia. And together they form the working group focused on the design of efficient tools for collecting rules and use from non-policy documents. The ultimate goal is to create a protocol for collecting and later using the institutional grammar to codify rules and use. So today they will be presenting on their working group report. Thank you so much to our presenters again. And with that, I will turn the floor over to you if you want to start sharing screen.
Thank you so much, Erica. Let me share the screen. Okay. Can you all see the screen?
Yes, yep, we can see it.
Yes. Perfect. So I'm Irene Pérez Ibarra from the University of Zaragoza, and as Erica said, I'm going to present the progress that we have made in one of the IGRI working groups called the Grammar of Rules in Use. So what I'm going to present today is the discussion and the outcomes of, I think, more than 2 years of discussion between all of us in discussing how can we use institutional grammar to better understand rules in use. So the main goal of this working group was to develop a protocol for applying institutional grammar 2.0 to analyze non-policy institutional data. And by non-policy institutional data, we mean analyzing documents that come from interviews or focus group, surveys, speeches, testimonies, court documents, etc., etc. So studying non-policy data is important because it can help us understand what is the relationship, the connection between formal, informal, and rules in use. So let's briefly introduce these different terms. So by formal institutions, we mean the different bylaws, policy, or regulation in general, while informal rules are the social norms or the customs. Rules in use will be the actual rules that are followed in practice, and they can be both formal or informal. Studying this connection or studying rules in use is important because we know that, for example, formal rules are not always followed. For example, we have example of corruptions or paper parks, or informal rules in the same way, they are not always followed. For example, in cases that there are cultural suppression. So understanding and studying rules in use is really crucial to understand how rules are actually put into practice and allow us to really assess what are the governance outcomes of these institutions. So when we are studying non-policy data, we want to understand the structure and meaning of rules in use. We want to understand the connection between formal and informal rules, and in general, improve our understanding of governance outcomes. So, however, we found great challenges when studying non-policy data and applying the institutional grammar. Mainly because the institutional grammar has been applied to rules in form, and we only have a few examples of studies applying the institutional grammar to non-policy data. We have here one of the very well-known example of the paper, People Don't Talk in Institutional Statements. So one of the challenges is because we do not have a coding instruction on how to apply the institutional grammar to non-policy data. So with non-policy data compared to formal rules or written regulation, we have great challenges in identifying institutional statements and identifying specific institutional grammar elements. Also, we need to work with the uncertainty of social data. So the goal of the working groups was to work with these challenges by creating a protocol for collecting, coding, and analyzing institution from non-policy data. Our protocol is based on 6 steps that goes from defining the research question to the analysis. So in the presentation, I'm going to present each of these steps. So let's start with the first one, that is to define your research question. As in any other research, this will be the first step. So you need to define what is the research question and to make sure that institutional grammar is the method that is adequate to respond to this research question. Another issue to consider is the source of the data that you are going to analyze. So in general, we can use a primary data that comes from interviews, focus groups, surveys, etc., that you design for your to respond to your research question, or you can use secondary data, so data that is available out there. So you can use social media, speeches, oral histories, etc., etc. And both of them have some pros and cons that are easy to understand. So with primary data, some of the pros is that we are designing our own tool. So we are designing our own interview guide, for example, to respond to our specific research question. And we can design the interview in a way that we maximize the number of institutional statements that we are collecting, but also we make sure that we collect and we get the specific grammatical elements. The cons are the cons of social research. So it requires time, effort, costs. Social research is subject to biases, etc., etc. On the contrary, the secondary data, the pros is that you don't need that much time, effort, or cost to use the data. And these are generally public data, so you are not subject to the IRB protocol, etc. However, the cons is that this data was not designed to respond to your specific research question, so you might be missing some of this information. Another approach will be to use a mixed data, like for example, using first secondary data and then confirm your findings with a primary data, with a specific interview, focus group, or survey. The second step, and this is very different from when you are studying policy data, is the identification of institutional statements. Because people don't talk in institutional statement. What they do is that they provide narratives, they tell you stories, or add information at different moment of the conversation. And this makes very difficult to identify the different institutional statements. So in our protocol, we give some tips that we have found in our research that is very useful when identifying institutional statement. So one would be to first discard what is considered non-institutional statements. For example, you can discard individual behaviors that are more based on internal motivation, for example, personal emotion, individual economic incentives, and better identify collective behaviors that can be based both on internal motivation, but also external motivation and formal rules. Also, it's very useful in the first analysis to compile and identify the different attributes, entity, aims, and function elements, because this will help you identify potential institutional statements. And then this initial statement is very useful to group them together to, in the next step, as we will see, find unique and comprehensive institutional statements. So as I said, the third step is when you write your final institutional statement. And again, this is very different from when you are analyzing formal rules or policy documents, because you need to completely rewrite the story that people are telling you to have a institutional statement that is compatible with the institutional grammar. So as in any other research, having a clear code book on how to write these institutional statements is essential. One tips can be use the same order of the grammatical elements. So you have to improve intercoding reliability and to really understand how to write the institutional statement. Other things to consider is transforming passive voice statements into active voice. But this again will depend on the research question and the code book of each specific research. Then one important step is that we need to create unique institutional statement, because people repeat themselves. They mention specific, or they add information in different parts of the interview. So merging redundant statements, so confirming repetition, incorporating grammatical elements that may come from different parts of the interview, or integrated contextual information that comes from different interviews or different parts of the same interviews to create this unique institutional statement. One important element here is that you might want to think of keeping track of the number of repetition of institutional statement, because we will see later on that you can use that to measure the consistency of your statements. So the fourth step will be to use the institutional grammar 2.0 from the interviews, from the institutional statement that you have written. So at this point, you need to confirm the level of expressiveness that you want to use in your institutional coding. So you can decide to use the core level, extended, or logical. Of course, this is a decision that you need to think about when you are defining your research question and your interview guide, to make sure that the interview you ask for these specific grammatical elements that you will need to use, for example, the extended level of expressiveness. Then, for example, you can consider using different reference annotation to identify, for example, the interviewee ID, the coder ID, the institutional statement ID. So in future research, you can compare, for example, the code that was made by different coders. You can also use semantic annotation to classify grammatical elements for future analysis and comparison. Here is an example in which we are using a semantic annotation to define the different roles or position of the different attributes. Like, for example, we have here three attributes, or the three different roles in the community: farmers, watchman, and president. And we are using the semantic annotation to define the different positions. So it will be farmer will be the user, president will be the leader, watchman will be the monitor. And this will depend on the research question, but creating this as a grammatical semantic annotation will help you to compare between, for example, case studies. We can also use semantic annotation to measure the uncertainty of this social data. And we can consider three types of uncertainty, which are accuracy, truthfulness, and consistency. Let's define each of these. So accuracy is the degree of subjective certainty regarding an inference. So remember that this is information that is based on interviews, for example. So there is a great uncertainty about, for example, some grammatical elements. And one important one is the deontic. And we can use this semantic annotation to define how sure we are about the grammatical element that we are inferring. Truthfulness refers to the degree of which interview responses can be considered true. And here we can use two measures to assess truthfulness. We can consider a subjective weight, like for example, when we are analyzing an interview, we can look for signs of uncertainty. For example, if people are using vague language or hesitation, like a statement like, I am not sure, I think, I don't remember. So if we find many of those, then we can reduce the weight that we are giving to these responses. We can also look at internal consistency. For example, if a particular interviewee is changing details within statements in different moments of the interview. We can also use an objective weight, and these are based on predefined attributes of actors that we have decided, like for example, the age, gender, the position, the experience. For example, if we want to give more weight to a person with more experience, so we can increase the weight in this in the measure of the truthfulness. And then we can also measure consistency, and is the degree of consistent responses among interviewees. And one measure that we can use is, for example, the frequency of repeating each statement. We can again use a semantic annotation and the logical operators to indicate this the uncertainty level, so the level of accuracy, truthfulness, and consistency. And we can use this annotation at the component level or statement level. So here, for example, at the component level, here is an example in which some people are saying that something must be done, others are saying must not. So you can include an annotation that gives you a number to decide what's the probability that in reality is a must or a must not. Or it can be at the grammatical level or at the statement level. So here we have, for example, two interviewees that are saying a completely different statement. So here is X must do Y, and here is X must not try Y. And you can measure, for example, the frequency of these statements are said among interviews. And why do we want to measure this uncertainty? Is because it can help you to better understand the governance outcomes. So when we study formal rules, we only have one unique result. So imagine we have a formal rule that it says X must do blue. So the result will be that always you transform to blue. So you have one unique result. There is no uncertainty. But if we study rules in use, sometimes we have some uncertainty. So maybe we have some interviewees that say that we must do blue, others says must not do blue, and then a different level of probability. So in the first example, with a probability, agents will do blue, and with a probability of 0.2, they must not bloom. So we can get, different gradients of potential outcomes. And this is important because when we are, so people may have different level of understanding or knowledge of the rules in the community. They have a different personal motivation that make them follow or not follow the rules. And at the end, imagine that we include this uncertainty in, for example, in an agent-based model. We can look at the different governance outcomes. So if we are studying formal rules, we will have no uncertainty. Everybody will do blue. But if we have, we are studying rules in use, we have some uncertainty. So we will have agents that are doing blue, others that are doing a lighter blue, etc., etc. And we can compare, for example, different communities, ones that have low uncertainty, meaning that, for example, they are all following more or less the same rules, others with higher uncertainty because we exactly don't know, or there are more discrepancy among the agents. Then the fifth step in our protocol is to calculate intercoded reliability. And this intercoded reliability, we recommend to do it at 2 steps. So in the first one is when we are developing our code book, we consider or we recommend to use the percentage of agreement. Usually a percentage of agreement or 80% of more is what we aim to get. And this percentage of agreement we can measure at 2 levels. So one will be related to the number of institutional statements that are being identified. Remember that with when we are studying non-policy data, there is a huge challenge in identifying institutional statements. So not all coders will identify the same number of institutional statements. And then at another level, we can calculate this percentage of agreement at on how we did the institutional grammar coding. And again, for this, having a clear code book is essential, and you need to decide at what level the intercode reliability will be done. So it can be done at the core level, at the extended level, or only focusing on specific institutional grammar elements. The second step will be when you have the coding complete, and what you usually use is the statistics, the Cohen's kappa or Krippendorf alpha, and usually you do this just to a random sample of the interview. So you might want to randomly select 20-30% of the whole document that you're analyzing, and then calculate kappa or alpha with this statement that you select. Finally, the sixth step, of course, is to doing the analysis. So in the institutional grammar 2.0, so Christopher and Saba made some suggestion of potential analysis that you can do when studying when using the institutional grammar. The same applies, of course, to rules in use, to non-policy data. So here we wanted just to highlight some of the attempts that have been done in analyzing non-policy data. So we are going to briefly present some of this research because it has some differences when you are using the same tools for formal rules. So Dan will present his research on networks with rules in use. Ute will present the work of Saba Siddiqui and collaborators in studying the relationship between rules in form and rules in use. And Alicia will present her research on study the evolution and diversity of institutions in using rules in use. So Dan, you want to start briefly present this research?
Sure. You're controlling the slides though. There. All right. Hello, everyone. Just briefly, because I presented this about exactly a year ago today on this seminar, so it's available on the IGRI website, I believe, still. So if you have any curiosities, you can go back there. But basically, I was my dissertation work, and now I'm working on some to publish a chapter or two of this. But where I used the rules and use protocol, or at least the burgeoning protocol, was comparing networks of prescribed interactions with some organic or ad hoc networks that popped up during the 20-year counterinsurgency in Afghanistan. So my research is looking at organizational behavior and interactions, um, especially cooperation or non-cooperation in the U.S. national security context. So I kind of used the methodology by Thomas Olivier's networks of prescribed interactions and comparing those to what's actually going on in the ground. So what I did here, and Irene really articulated the challenges well that really map on to my work here. Uh, Basically, what I was doing is I didn't interview people myself. I was using interviews that were third-party interviews. They're known as the Afghanistan papers, but they had a more technical name. But basically, these were interviews of lessons learned with government officials being interviewed at all different levels, from the national government to organizations within the national security infrastructure, all the way down to people on the ground in Afghanistan trying to implement strategy. And the reason I was doing this research is because the strategies did not seem to be coordinated. They seem to be kind of hit and miss and conflict with each other. So that's why I wanted to compare these networks of prescribed interactions, which were created by presidential directives. So I used the standard IG 2.0 to pull out institutional statements from these formal documents that were saying, organization A must coordinate with organization B on X. And that was in writing. Those were rules and form or formal kind of networks that were built. My informal networks were built out of these interviews, so these third-party interviews. So hundreds of interviews, and I used as in like step 3, the challenge of pulling out institutional statements from these interviews was difficult. So I might have scanned, 500 pages and maybe just had tens of statements that I could pull out of there. So it was difficult. But really what it did, it gave me the interactions between organizations as they were happening. So ad hoc or organic networks that were happening out in the real world, I guess, if you want to say, in the Afghanistan counterinsurgency effort. And what this helped me do is much like what Tomas and Adela did in their previous work, is I compared the two networks to see differences in cooperation and coordination between different elements. And there was, I found variance in the levels of cooperation between what was supposed to happen in these networks of prescribed interactions and the ad hoc networks. Whereas the ad hoc ones they built coordination and cooperation in areas that were kind of gaps left by the formal interactions. It gave me a more complete understanding of organizational behavior in the national security context, especially in these long-term kind of strategic areas like counterinsurgency or counterterrorism, and built on some things I did earlier in the dissertation, just looking at like legislation. So it gave me a bigger, a fuller picture of that. And I just wanted to, before I move on, give you some of the kind of the challenges I had with this, and some of you, I think it was covered, but really transforming these third-party interviews into finding the institutional statements. So much like interviews that are for a purpose of the research question, you can find those institutional statements with the different syntax and pull them out and restructure them. The challenge is doing that without changing the meaning, without putting words in people's mouths, because you want to get a statement from what you're seeing on the paper. That was a challenge. But also the intercoder reliability is a challenge, because I became very literate and what positions were what. So if an interview mentioned a specific person's name, I knew which position that person filled, and it's not referenced anywhere in the interview. I just happen to know what position they filled. So that's a little bit difficult. The benefits, though, are pretty astounding. I really like the benefits of it and how I used it and how it can be used. So not only these third-party interviews, which were publicly available, a large, basically, data pool that you can grab from that are out in public. In this case, the Washington posted a job for me by getting a FOIA, or Freedom of Information Act, to pull the documents out of the Department of Defense, so they're readily available to the public. But in future use also, I think the benefit is looking at congressional hearings, the transcriptions of those, speeches, policy speeches. So those things that aren't necessarily on paper, but can give you some institutional statements and rules and use that kind of show you how bureaucrats at all different levels are interpreting the formal guidance of whether it's legislation or some sort of regulation, right? So it was very beneficial. There are challenges, but I think the benefits of this are great, and it really helped me out, especially with the network analysis part of that. So I'll turn it over. Sorry, I talked a little bit too long there.
No, that was perfect. Thank you, Dan. Ute, do you want to really present Saba's research?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so this is early work. So this is based on work that Saba did individually and as part of a collaboration in 2011 and 2014. So, and I'm sorry, 2012 and 2014. So this is IG 1.0 work. It's important to emphasize that. And also at that time, the IG, I'm sorry, the IG 1.0 was going under some syntactic revisions. So Saba added the object to the original syntax or Ostrom syntax of the IG. But why we've included this particular research is because it's a nice illustration of how the rules in use can be used to connect formal policy design with actual governance outcomes. And so what Saba did in her research was basically an institutional analysis of the formal aquaculture regulations in Colorado, Virginia, and Florida. And so what she did is she coded the regulations using the IG 1.0, but then she used that coding to inform her interview protocol and a coupled Q-sort activity that she then used in her interviews of stakeholders involved in aquaculture in those states to help measure how they perceived compliance, what their perceptions were of policy legitimacy, coerciveness, and enforcement, and how that influenced the way that they actually engaged with these aquaculture regulations. And so what the IG did here is it applying the IG, so using this structure and then applying it to the interview, she was able to capture the variation between the design of the formal rules, which she had coded, and how they are perceived. And she found that guilt and fear of social disapproval were identified as important factors for influencing compliance, but she also found that the deontic must was often associated, so in the rules was often associated with divergent values. Some people complied with the must, but others did not think that the must was necessarily an indication that this is a mandatory action. And so they viewed it a little bit differently. So by doing this, she was able to parse out these differentiations. So I think her research really demonstrated the value of IG coding to better connect rules informed to rules in use. Yes, she only applied it to the formal rules, but even in this limited perception, it was really useful to guide the way she conducted her interviews and the way that she was able to identify how these formal rules are actually operationalized by people engaged in the activity that's being regulated.
Thank you, Ute. So finally, I think, Alicia, can you present your research on studying the institutional diversity with rules in use?
Yeah, sure. Well, In this study, we applied the institutional grammar to analyze rules in use in traditional livestock farming communities in northern Spain. We conducted in-depth interviews with elderly people in 8 small communities. These interviews were designed to elicit the institutional statement, basically the rules, the norms, and the strategy that these farmers are actually following in practice. And we drew on the Ostrom design principles to maximize the retrieval of these rules in use. So using the IG, we coded each statement to identify the type of and the grammatical components, which allow us to track the institutional change over time, specifically which rules have disappeared, persist, or emerged, and also the typology of the rules, the different types of rules in these communities. So in the following slide, can you change the slide?
I did. Can you not? You don't see the new one?
No.
Mm-mm.
Right now. Thank
Oh,
you.
okay.
No, sorry. What we found was striking because about 76% of the institutions that we identified in the interviews were no longer in use. So these rules have disappeared. And except in one community where 82% of these rules are still active. So most of the statements that we found were strategies rather than formal rules, which highlight the informal nature of the governance in these systems. And I think that overall, this study shows how applying the institutional grammar to non-policy data can help us to document institutional change and better understand the diversity of the rules in use that shape the collective action and the resource management in these type of communities.
Thank you, Alicia. So just to conclude our talk, we just want to briefly present what are the next steps in our working group. So our goal now is to extend the application of our protocol and to test its validity. And we can also want to collect other studies that are analyzing non-policy data with institutional grammar. So one of the results of this working group is that we are starting a collection in the International Journal of the Commons. The name of the collection is like a special issue in the journal. It's a Commons Governance through New Perspective on Rules in Use. So the collection is already open for submission. So if any, our protocol will be hopefully published in this collection. So if any of you are studying rules in use and would like to contribute to this collection, please let us know. You can email Ute or email me, and we will follow up with more specific information. Well, thank you very much.